Adventures of Ellen White and the Pioneers. Don't forget the children.
As you may know from your own experience in school or other groups, sometimes it's not easy being in a class or a group of children who do not believe in God. The Adventist children had this difficulty too, as they had to go to regular public schools, where lessons were even given on Sabbath. But as the Seventh-day Adventist Church grew, it became better organized, and soon Adventist schools were established. Mrs. White was given visions from God that we should have church schools, where our boys and girls and young people could have a Christian education and have Christian teachers. God told her that there should be a Christian school even if there are no more than 6 children to attend. The very first Adventist school we had was a college at Battle Creek, Michigan, but there were no schools for the younger children. Mrs. White insisted that we must not forget the children. If we are to have faithful men and women to become leaders and workers, then we must start to train the young. Let's turn to Proverbs 22 verse 6 and see what the Bible says about children. It says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it." So the college began to train teachers to go out and start church schools. But even before the teachers could finish their college courses, some of the parents sent in requests for the teachers to come and teach their children. They said, "We need a church school. Our children must study the Bible in school. They must learn to become missionaries." The parents believe that if we are to be workmen for God, then we need to study, as it says in 2 Timothy 2 verse 15. Let's read it. "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." 2 of these parents were Mr. and Mrs. Albert Alkire. In the spring of 1897, they wrote to the president of our Battle Creek College and said they wanted a teacher to start a school for their 5 children. But there was no teacher ready yet to start a school. And all summer, President Sutherland did his best to get some teachers ready. And at the end of the summer, Mrs. Alkire wrote a letter, and it contained quite sad news. It said that Mr. Alkire had died, but Mrs. Alkire said in the letter that she still wanted a school and they must have a teacher. And by this time 4 other churches were also asking for teachers. So 5 young men and women volunteered to leave their college classes and go out and start church schools. A young lady by the name of Maud Walcott went to Bear Lake, Michigan to begin a school for Mrs. Alkire's children. It was a cold, snowy white world when Miss Walcott arrived. The ground and trees were covered with a heavy blanket of snow, and the lakes were frozen over. But Miss Walcott was warmly welcomed by the students and Mrs. Alkire. How thankful they were that she was willing to come and begin a school. There were also other children from that little church who came to the new school, making a total of 13 students. Because they did not have a real school building or schoolhouse, as they called it in those days, their school was way out in the country in the farmhouse of Mrs. Alkire. It was not a big house. It only had 2 rooms and a shed on the first floor, and the upstairs was only partly finished at the time that Mr. Alkire had died. And there was a little room for the teacher, and 1 big room for the mother and 5 children. The front room became the schoolroom, where they used tables and chairs instead of desks and seats, and there was a homemade blackboard. But the thing that the children liked best of all was the pump organ. The teacher played it while the children sang, and oh, how they loved to sing. The family usually went the 5 miles to Sabbath school and church with the horse and wagon. One time when it was too cold for the horses to go, Miss Walcott and her oldest student Laura walked the 5 miles through the snow and over the ice on the lake. Miss Walcott's nose and ears froze, but she got to Sabbath school, and she started on time because she was the Sabbath school superintendent. There were many experiences that first year that showed how the Lord was watching over them and blessing their little school. One day, the roof of the house caught fire. Miss Walcott and Alice quickly ran upstairs and piled up chairs on which the teacher stood and threw dippers of water that Alice handed her onto the roof. Outside, Laura climbed an old shaky ladder to get to the roof so as to throw the buckets of water that the other children passed up to her. At last the fire was out and the school was saved. Mrs. Alki did not even know about the fire because she was out in the barn loft alone, praying for her children and the teacher and the new school. She was tired and sad and lonely without her husband, and so she was asking God to bless her and help her train her 5 fatherless children in the right way. And all without her even knowing it, the Lord was right there at that time helping her children and the teacher to save their home and the school. When she came out of the barn and they told her what had happened, Mrs. Alki was very thankful, for she saw that God had already answered her prayer, and this gave her new courage to face the future. As a result of that beginning of the church schools in 1897, there were 15 of these small schools by the end of that first school year. And every day since then, more new schools have started. Until today, there are about 5,000 Seventh-day Adventist schools all over the world. Over in the jungles of Africa and Borneo, along the big rivers in South America and India, out in the deserts, tropical islands, all over the world, there are church schools and Christian teachers teaching not only reading and writing and maths, but also the Bible and about the great love of Jesus. Many boys and girls would never learn about Jesus if our church had not organized these schools. Parents in those faraway countries are anxious for their children to go to these schools so that they can get an education, and many of them also become Christians. Besides elementary schools or primary schools, there are about 700 colleges and academies all over the world, so that our young people may get an education in almost any subject right in our own schools. Yes, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has branched out in many ways and in many places since that very first college in Battle Creek, which began to train teachers as a result of the visions given to Mrs. White many years ago. Come and join us next time to hear all about battling the enemy.